Welcome to the Power of Purity podcast, the show that empowers men to experience their sexual gift in a healthier way. Now here's your host, Tony Ingracia.
Hey guys, Tony here. Welcome back to this episode of the Power of Purity podcast, and I really appreciate you being here with me today. As we continue the episode that we started last week entitled, Is Scheduling Sex a Good Idea? And before we jump into that, let me just mention that we do have our upcoming Power of Purity Intensive Workshop. It's going to be June 12, 13, and 14, 2020. And it's 3 days that can change your life. So if you're in a place where you're ready to deal with your relationship with your sexual self and to push into your story, to understand some things about yourself, and to get some tools and resources that are going to make an unbelievable difference in your heart and life, to change your relationship with your sexual self, to help you get to the place where you bring your sexual gift under the authority of Christ, and to learn to manage and express your sexual gift in a way that's honoring not only to God but also to your wife, then you are very welcome to visit this workshop. And it's in the St. Louis area, and I really believe that it could be life-changing as it empowers you to understand some things about yourself and to process some things and to look at some things and to understand some things that are going to make a significant difference in this journey of sexual purity. So God bless you. And I would like to mention that I know that it's been a crazy situation with the COVID and all that stuff, but I want you to know that we can practice social distancing in the context of the intensive. We've got plenty of room in our church building to spread out. What we did last time in our March intensive is each guy had his own table, and we were like 10 to 12 feet apart from each other. So we had plenty of space, plenty of social distancing. So I'm very confident that it'll be a very safe environment. And if you're interested, you can go to the Power of Purity website, which is powerofpurity.org. There's a link at the top that says Intensive Workshop. Click on that link. It'll give you all the information, and there's a registration form there. And if you have any questions, feel free to contact me, and I'll try to answer your questions. And I pray that it's something that you might consider and something that would be life-changing for you. So God bless you as you consider that. And with that being said, guys, let's go ahead and jump into today's episode as we continue where we left off last week. The title of the episode is Scheduling Sex a Good Idea? And I have 10 principles that I want to share with you guys concerning this idea of scheduling sex in the context of your marriage and relationship. And last week we covered the first 3 points of the 10 points, and they were, in the way of quick review, number 1, sex does not have to be spontaneous. Number 2, sometimes it's better to make something happen instead of waiting for something to happen. And point number 3 was a schedule makes sexual intimacy the priority that it should be in your relationship and marriage. And with that being said, it brings us to the 4th principle that I want to share with you on this topic of, is scheduling sex a good idea? And the 4th principle is this: a schedule does not have to eliminate spontaneity. So, for example, if you and your spouse decide to give this idea of a schedule a try, it doesn't mean that you still can't be spontaneous when it comes to lovemaking. And what I mean is, let's say that there's a metaphorical couple, Mr. and Mrs. Jones, and they decide they're going to make love at least 1 time per week. So they end up, after discussion, they choose Sunday afternoon to be their designated time to share physical intimacy, to make love. So that's their anticipated schedule, Sunday afternoon. But what's to say that if things come about in such a way, for example, on a Tuesday, or a Thursday, or a Friday, or a Saturday, or any other time of the week for that matter, that Mr. and Mrs. Jones can't go ahead and go with the flow when they're feeling the vibe and when they're feeling the juice, and they can go ahead and make love on any other day of the week, even though it doesn't happen to be Sunday afternoon, which is their scheduled day to make love. So the fact of the matter is that a schedule does not have to eliminate spontaneity, and Mr. and Mrs. Jones are still welcome to make love and to share intimacy whenever the mood strikes them. So we see the reality of point number 4 here, that a schedule does not mean that you cannot still be spontaneous in your lovemaking. And that brings us to the 5th principle of our presentation: is scheduling sex a good idea? And the 5th principle is this: a schedule will facilitate and strengthen the sexual alliance between a couple. And let me just share a few thoughts with you here, guys. The sexual alliance is an incredibly important and necessary understanding, I believe, for every married couple. And I did a series that I entitled The Sexual Alliance on the podcast, the Power of Purity podcast, and that's episodes number 35 to 40. And if you've never heard that series, I would very much encourage you to listen to that series, because I think it is very, very important for every married couple to understand this concept of a sexual alliance. What is a sexual alliance? Why is a sexual alliance so important? And how do we set up a sexual alliance? What does it mean? How do we do it? So listen to that podcast series, episodes 35 to 40, The Sexual Alliance. And if you haven't heard it in a while, I might encourage you to go back and listen to it, because I really think it's that important. But in a nutshell, I'm just going to share briefly here a few thoughts about the sexual alliance. We believe that according to God's will, plan, and purpose for human sexuality, that our sexual gifts should be expressed exclusively and enjoyed exclusively, experienced exclusively in the context of our marriage with our spouse. That's the way God designed sexual intimacy to be shared and experienced. And a key word emerges here, which is the word exclusivity. There should be an exclusivity in the way that I experience and express my sexual gift. And that means that when I understand this, it really brings clarity to what I can and cannot do in the expression of my sexual self, right? I can't go over here and look at porn all by myself. I can't flirt with another woman or have an affair or have cyber sex or use a prostitute, because all of these would be expressions of my sexual gift outside of the context of my relationship with my spouse. So when I understand the sexual alliance, I understand that I can only have and share sexual intimacy in the context of my marriage with my spouse. And if a couple is going to do sex the way God intends them to do sex, this means that they have to embrace this concept of a sexual alliance. They need to enter into a commitment, a covenant with one another, that they will be sexually exclusive with one another. They will be sexually available to one another. They will be sexually committed to one another, and that they will never ever express their mutual sexual gift apart from one another. And so, if a couple is willing to enter into this sexual alliance with each other, this commitment, this covenant that they make with one another, then they're understanding and acknowledging and embracing and recognizing the importance of sexual intimacy between the two of them within the context of their marriage. And it brings light and understanding to what's right and what's wrong. It helps bring wisdom into our life, right? Because if people understand, for example, the sexual alliance, well, what isn't going to work is if one person commandeers control of sex in the context of their marriage, and let's say one person says, I don't want sex, I'm not interested, and they turn off sex, they shut down sexually, they don't want to have sex for 6 months, 7 months, a year or two. I am not kidding you guys. I know many couples, and I've worked with couples that have not had sexual intimacy in their marriage for years at a time, up to 7 years, and more or less people go with no sexual intimacy. And in my understanding and estimation, this is a violation of God's design of the marriage covenant and sex within marriage. And when people do this in the context of their marriage, they are literally putting themselves in an impossible situation. Because when a married couple is not able to function together sexually, they can't have a regularity, they're not meeting or connecting with one another, then it consigns these people basically to be non-sexual. How can they live with never ever having any sexual expression? It makes it very, very difficult. Which, by the way, if I had to choose a proof text for this concept of the sexual alliance, I would, of course, choose the 1 Corinthians chapter 7 passage, which I'll go ahead and read just for the fun of it. Paul says in verse 1, Now for the matters you wrote about, it is good for a man not to marry. But since there is so much immorality, each man should have his own wife, and each woman her own husband. The husband should fulfill his marital duty to his wife, and likewise the wife should fulfill her marital duty to her husband. The wife's body does not belong to her alone, but also to her husband. In the same way, the husband's body does not belong to him alone, but also to his wife. Do not deprive each other except by mutual consent and for a time, so that you may devote yourselves to prayer. Then come together again so that Satan will not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. So, Paul lays out some beautiful scriptures here that essentially undergird and serve as the proof text of this concept of the sexual alliance. He very clearly is presenting that a married couple should be committed to one another sexually, and that they should be available to each other sexually, and they should not withhold from one another sexually, and that if they do decide to abstain, it should be by mutual consent only, mutual consent and agreement, and then only for a very abbreviated period of time so that they will not be overcome with undue temptation. So much can be said about this sexual alliance, you guys. I'm telling you, it is an incredibly important principle, and I can't remember offhand, but I think I share 19 different principles of the sexual alliance through that presentation, the Sexual Alliance, episodes 35 to 40 of the Power of Purity podcast. So again, if you haven't heard that, go back and listen to that, and I do think that it will be very helpful. But toward our purpose today, let me read one more time. Principle number 5 of this presentation is scheduling sex a good idea. Principle 5 is this: a schedule will facilitate and strengthen the sexual alliance between a couple. So what I mean to say here, you guys, I hope it just makes sense, that if a couple is committed to the concept of the sexual alliance, and they're committed to doing sex God's way, they're committed and they understand the extreme importance of being available to one another on a regular basis, of not withholding from each other, the importance of connecting intimately and physically on a regular basis with each other, and committed to this idea of sexual exclusivity, then their physical intimacy it's not nonchalant. It's incredibly important, and it needs to be a priority. So all that I'm saying here is that a schedule can become a very practical tool that will facilitate and strengthen the sexual alliance. In other words, this metaphorical couple, Mr. and Mrs. Jones, they're not going to be nonchalant about it. They're not going to say, well, it's no big deal and we'll see if it happens. We'll wait for it to happen. No, they're more committed, more intentional. They're going to make it happen. They're not going to wait for it to happen. So by using a schedule, they're saying this is such a priority that we're going to make sure that we're connecting with each other on a regular basis. So a schedule could actually facilitate the sexual alliance and strengthen the sexual alliance because this couple is so committed to one another that they're going to make sure that they have this connection on a regular basis. So with that being said, it brings me to the sixth reason that a schedule can be very important and very helpful as a tool for every married couple to make sure that they're keeping their sexual intimacy the priority and with the frequency and regularity that will help them to be healthy with each other and that it deserves. Our sixth principle is this: a schedule will bring accountability to the low desire partner. And this point is incredibly important, you guys. I'm going to try to talk through it here for just a moment, and I pray and I hope that it makes sense. We've talked about this before, that in the context of every married couple, almost without exception, one person is higher sexed and one person is lower sexed. Or said another way, one person wants sex more and one person wants sex less. So maybe this person would like to have sex for real every single day. They could have sex every single day. And this other spouse doesn't have that much of a sex drive. They don't want sex every day. So maybe they would be happy to have sex once a week, or maybe every few weeks, or maybe even once a month. It's just not that big a deal to them. And I think we can quickly see how this disparity in sexual interest and drive and desire and appetite can become a big, big problem in the context of a marriage. If somebody wants it more and somebody wants it less, it leads to tension and conflict and misunderstanding and hurt and resentment and confusion and disorientation, because it becomes inevitable that people become dissatisfied. If it isn't happening enough, the person that wants it more is unhappy because it's not happening as much as they would like it to happen. And if it's happening too much, the person who doesn't want it that much is unhappy because they feel like they're being pressured into having sex that they don't want to be having all the time. So it's incredibly important that every married couple find what I call a sexual rhythm that works for them within the context of their marriage. And this is all part of what I talk about in the series, The Sexual Alliance, episodes 35 to 40. So you can check that out. So what happens by default, and just trust me on this, you guys, I think I've talked about it earlier in the podcast, but what happens without exception is that the low desire partner in the relationship ends up controlling sex. They become the gatekeeper of sexual intimacy and sexual frequency in the marriage because they are the low desire partner. And it's not that they even try to commandeer this control or they seize the control, but it just is automatic. It happens automatically because they are the low desire partner. One metaphor is that the high desire partner is the gas in the car. The gas makes it go. The low desire partner is the brakes, because you hit the brakes and the car stops, right? There's no forward motion. Nothing's happening here. So the high desire partner wants to give it gas. Let's go. Let's have more sex. the low desire partner's hitting the brakes. No, I'm not interested. So let's say one day the high desire partner initiates. They would like to go. The low desire partner hits the brakes. No, I'm not in the mood today. I don't want to do it today. So they're perpetually hitting the brakes. So what happens is the low desire partner, by default, seizes control. They get control of sexual frequency and intimacy within the marriage, because it's only going to happen as often as the low desire partner allows it to happen. Because the high desire partner would be willing to do it virtually any time that the low desire partner is willing to do it. So the high desire partner is always waiting for the low desire partner to let off the brake and to give the green light. Okay, we can go ahead and do this. So now the high desire partner is ready to go because they've been waiting. So the pace and the regularity and the frequency of intimacy is going to be determined by default by the low desire partner. So the point that I'm getting to here, you guys, is that a schedule will bring accountability to the low desire partner. And really, I think it would be fair to say, maybe better said, that a schedule will bring accountability to both partners in the relationship, the high desire partner and the low desire partner. Because the high desire partner, well, let me say it this way. Let's say that a particular couple decides, and let's say the disparity is difficult enough in this particular metaphorical relationship, Mr. and Mrs. Jones, that what they end up deciding is that they're going to try to have sex 2 times per week. And therefore, this is their agreement, their sexual alliance together, the sexual regularity. This is the schedule that they're going to try. Well, it brings a kind of accountability to the high desire partner, right? Because the high desire partner might like for this to happen every single day, right? 7 days a week. But dude, you need to accept the fact that it isn't going to happen every single day, because that's not who you're married to, and your partner has a much lower sexual threshold, much lower sexual desire than you. So it's not happening 7 days a week. So it brings an accountability to the high desire partner that they've got to lower themselves down. It's going to happen 2 times a week. That's what our schedule is. And dude, you need to be accountable to that. But it's also going to bring an accountability to the low desire partner, whose inclination might be to avoid it and neglect it and to say, no, I'm not in the mood, and day by day goes by. And before you know it, weeks have gone by, if not months, and it hasn't happened. So the schedule is going to bring an accountability to the low desire partner, which basically says, dude, you can't not have sex with your spouse. If you guys are going to be healthy, you need this alliance. You need a sexual rhythm that's going to work for you. And you guys have acknowledged and kind of figured out, okay, we're going to try twice a week, so that even if the low desire partner maybe doesn't necessarily want it that much, but they're going to agree to this schedule for the health, the overall health and well-being of their marriage and their spouse, and the high desire partner is going to be held accountable to the same schedule. You can't have it more than that. And therefore, it's going to bring a regularity to this couple. And therefore, the schedule is going to bring accountability really to both of them within the context of the marriage, which can be incredibly important. And what the schedule is going to do, it's not going to allow either one of the partners to get away with their preference, right? The guy that wants it every single day, he can't get away with that. It's not going to happen. And the schedule is going to bring a rhythm and an accountability and a reasonable aspect and regularity that can possibly work for them within the context of their marriage. So it's going to bring that accountability to the high desire partner and to the low desire partner. And let me just say, you guys, that I really think that this is incredibly important for both people within the context of the marriage, because if we aren't careful, what happens is the low desire partner ends up getting this control. They become the gatekeeper. And if they are allowed and given permission to exercise complete control over sexual regularity, it can lead to big problems in the context of the marriage. Let me just say, in the way of personal testimony, and you guys have heard my story, but in the early years of my marriage, my wife and I were a total disaster, and we were completely missing each other when it came to physical intimacy. We were both a mess, and when you take two messes and put them together, you get a bigger mess, right? And for whatever reasons, my wife was completely shut down. I was a young man with a sexual addiction, so I wanted sex constantly, which overwhelmed her, which shut her down and pushed her away from me. And we ended up in this cycle where we were just missing each other, and we could not connect to each other in a healthy way around sex at all. And because of this, we would go for prolonged periods of time, months and months and months and months at a time, with no physical intimacy between us. And Sherry was so shut down, she just wasn't interested. And it kind of drove me crazy. It made me feel hurt and rejected and confused and overwhelmed. And I'd get angry at her and God. And that would, of course, make the situation even worse, because she could discern and detect my resentment and my perpetual seething anger toward her, which pushed her even more away. And the whole thing got more and more confused and convoluted. And it was just an absolute mess. And neither one of us had an accountability, and we didn't know how to connect. And when we eventually ended up in our therapeutic process, we started working through our stories and understanding some things about ourselves and things that had happened to us around our sexual selves that provoked deep brokenness and shame. God began to heal our hearts and our stories and our journey. And as God was healing us as individuals, He was then able to begin to perpetrate this healing into our relationship. And we began to turn and face each other and move toward each other sexually and intimately, and begin to connect with each other on a more regular basis, because we were getting healthier and healthier. And along the way, without even realizing what we were doing, at the time, we didn't have the verbiage for it the way that we do today, these terms of the sexual alliance and sexual rhythm, right? But what we did is we forged our own sexual alliance because of the horrible place we had come from. It's like we were understanding and recognizing we can't live like that. We're going to have to figure out how to make this thing work. We're going to have to move toward each other and find a rhythm that works for us. And we realized, Tony, you're not going to get as much sex as you would prefer because Sherry isn't that highly sexed. But Sherry, you can't just go for weeks and weeks and months and months and months without participating sexually in your marriage, because that's going to be incredibly hard for your husband. So we both realized we had a responsibility and an accountability in this thing to one another within the context of our marriage. So basically, it's like I had to tone myself down, bring myself down more toward Sherry's level, and Sherry had to bring herself up more toward my level. And as we became willing to do that, we were moving toward one another, and it was helping us to connect on a more regular basis, and we were getting healthier and healthier. So I have no doubt that these ideas really helped us in the healing and the forward progress of our marriage. And I'm actually going to share a little bit more with you about this, I guess, in our next episode, because I see that we're running out of time for today. But Sherry and I have actually used a schedule for intimacy on and off several different times throughout the context of our marriage. At the time of this recording, we have been married 36 years, and we are in a very, very good place with each other when it comes to physical intimacy, probably healthier than we've ever been. And therefore, it's been quite a long time since we've used a schedule, because we're kind of like in a place in our marriage where we really don't need the schedule right now, because the frequency happens regular enough that we're doing fine with each other. We don't need a schedule to kind of monitor ourselves and hold ourselves accountable. And so we aren't using a schedule right now, but we have used a schedule on and off throughout our marital history, and it has been a tremendous stepping stone that helped us when there were times of tension and confusion and disorientation. So I really believe in it. For me, you guys, this thing about the possibility of using a schedule for sex, is a schedule a good idea? I believe it is, yes, because it has facilitated and helped Sherry and I within the context of our marriage. So I advocate for this not just from a theoretical framework, you guys, but from a practical, tangible, personal experience framework, because it has worked for me, it's worked for us, it's helped us, it's blessed us, and that's why I wanted to share some of these ideas with you. So with that being said, you guys, I see that I'm out of time for today's episode, so I guess we'll be coming back for one more installment of this particular teaching. Is scheduling sex a good idea? So I'll look forward to seeing you back here for next week's episode of the Power of Purity podcast. In the meantime, be blessed, go forward with God, be committed to your sexual purity, have a game plan, exercise your no muscle this week, guys. Walk in the light and be blessed by God in Jesus' name. I'll look forward to seeing you right back here next week. Bye-bye now.
Thanks for listening. Visit powerofpurity.org for more resources and information. And if this podcast has been helpful or encouraging, please invite a friend to listen. Until next time, remember, there's power in purity.